carpets or drinking or pills. I wouldn't have had time to learn a song if I'd have been as sick as they've printed me all the time.
Do you believe that legends who earned million-dollar salaries and owned entire mansions could end up completely broke walking the streets with empty pockets overnight? The truth is even harsher when there were superstars who were once the kings of the global box office, yet at the time of their death had only a few loose dollars left on them, or the most glamorous screen sirens were discovered working as hired cleaners just to make a living. Even more horrifying, some prodigies were turned into addicts by the very studios from their teenage years to exploit their labor to the fullest, only to be ruthlessly discarded the moment their beauty began to fade. In today's video, we will uncover 9 Hollywood stars who lost all their wealth overnight. Do you know any other stars with stories like this? Leave a comment below for everyone to know. Judy Garland. The money-making machine drained dry and a cruel contract. Frances Ethel Gumm, later known worldwide as Judy Garland, stepped into the gilded cage of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer MGM at just 13 years old. At that time in 1935, Hollywood operated under a brutal studio system where young stars were treated no differently from commodities fully owned by powerful moguls. From the very beginning, Garland was thrown into an unimaginable schedule of academic studies. In the morning, vocal training at noon, filming in the afternoon, and promotional photo shoots at night. To sustain an 18-hour workday aimed at maximizing studio profits, her teenage body was forced to function with the aid of various drugs. By 1939, when she starred in the blockbuster The Wizard of Oz, the tragedy became even more brutal under strict managerial control. Despite having a completely normal weight, MGM forced her to maintain an extremely thin appearance to look perfect on screen. This system imposed a diet consisting only of black coffee, thin soup, and constant smoking to suppress hunger. Even more frightening, she was given stimulants to stay awake for overnight filming, then sedatives so she could fall asleep instantly during the few hours of rest she had. This toxic cycle made her body completely dependent on chemicals from puberty, turning her into a pre-programmed labor machine. Throughout the 1940s, despite generating millions of dollars in revenue for MGM, Judy Garland had no control over even a single cent of that massive fortune. Physical exploitation was accompanied by psychological torment, as she was constantly criticized for her appearance by studio executives, creating a deep insecurity that followed her for life. By 1947, she fell into severe mental breakdown, but instead of receiving treatment, the studio saw her as a costly obstacle to their productions. After extracting every ounce of value from her across 21 films, MGM coldly suspended and terminated her contract, throwing her out into the world in a state of exhaustion and without the skills to protect herself. Hollywood had created a work and drug addict, then used that very condition as justification to punish and discard its own victim. In her later years, although she continued performing on stage to survive, she was constantly surrounded by debt and prolonged tax issues. On June 22, 1969, the legendary star of The Wizard of Oz was found dead in the bathroom of a rented house in London at just 47 years old. Autopsy results showed she died from an accumulation of sleeping pills in her bloodstream, a direct consequence of the working methods imposed by studios 30 years earlier. A radiant icon who once generated billions for the film industry ended her journey in financial hardship and profound loneliness. The next fate will make you shudder even more at the cruelty of fame. Mickey Rooney, the king of the box office and the unimaginable figure of $18,000. Stepping onto the stage almost as soon as he could walk, Rooney signed with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer MGM and quickly became the highest-grossing star in America during the period 1939 to 1941. At the peak of his career, this young man was a true money-printing machine, appearing in as many as 43 films within just his first 10 years. His accumulated income by the early 1960s was estimated at around $12 million, equivalent to hundreds of millions today, a figure sufficient to guarantee a luxurious life for generations. However, the studio system at the time established one-sided contracts where actors were paid only once and received no royalties when films were re-released. This meant studios profited from Rooney's works for life, while he was left with nothing the moment he was no longer on set. The biggest shock came when he returned after World War II and realized he had been discarded by the system simply because his appearance no longer suited leading adult roles. From earning $100,000 per film, he was forced down to a meager $25,000, causing the cash flow of a millionaire to rapidly dry up. In 1962, the entertainment world was stunned when the once king officially declared bankruptcy for the first time due to poor financial management and obligations from multiple divorces. But the personal tragedy grew even darker in 1966, when his wife was found dead at their home alongside another man using his own gun. Despite working continuously into old age to pay off debts, Rooney could not escape the harsh financial trap that Hollywood had set. In 2011, at the age of 90, the world was once again shaken when he stood before the U.S. Senate to accuse his own family members of controlling and exploiting his assets. A cinematic legend who had appeared in more than 300 films had to tearfully admit that he had no right to spend the very money he had earned. The ruthless control from his family and the lack of protection from the industry turned his final years into a living hell. When he passed away in 2014 at the age of 93, the remaining fortune of the man who once ruled the box office was only $18,000. This amount was not even enough to cover his outstanding medical bills and taxes, leaving fans with deep sorrow over the cruelty of fame. Could a $1 million star vanish and be found working as a hired cleaner? Hedy Lamarr, a genius imprisoned by beauty and the cruelty of technology. If anyone could embody the intersection of breathtaking beauty and extraordinary intelligence, it was Hedwig Eva Maria Keisler, later known as Hedy Lamarr. Born into an upper-class family in Vienna with a father who was a bank director, her life was soon surrounded by men who wanted to possess her like a valuable piece of jewelry. Her first marriage to arms dealer Friedrich Mandl was a gilded iron cage where she was confined to political gatherings merely to enhance her husband's image. It was here that she accidentally overheard military secrets about guidance systems, foundational knowledge she would later use to change the world of technology. In 1937, she made a dramatic escape to London and met Louis B. Mayer, the powerful head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Mayer immediately signed her, but also established a new form of imprisonment by crafting her image as the most beautiful woman in the world, devoid of depth. MGM exploited her beauty in shallow, seductive roles and deliberately suppressed any effort by Lamarr to demonstrate artistic depth. While the world admired her beauty in Algiers and Samson and Delilah, she quietly worked on technical drawings in her private laboratory. In 1942, Lamarr and composer George Antheil invented a frequency hopping system, the foundation of modern Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, to help the U.S. military avoid signal jamming. However, because she was a woman and a glamorous star, her contribution was ignored and she received not a single cent in royalties when the patent expired. Financial tragedy began to surround her when she tried to escape the studio system to produce her own films but failed disastrously, losing millions of dollars. Costly divorces, 6 in total, and a lavish lifestyle driven by image pressure caused her $7 million fortune to evaporate quickly. By the late 1950s, from being one of the wealthiest icons, she fell into a situation where she had to live on a small allowance of just $48 per week. The public was truly shocked to learn that a legend like her had been arrested for shoplifting in 1966 and 1991 due to financial crisis. Hollywood had drained her beauty and discarded her once the marks of time appeared, leaving a genius to live in poverty and isolation. When she passed away in early 2000, the world finally began to realize it owed this woman both gratitude and long overdue financial justice. Geniuses sometimes do not collapse from a lack of intelligence, but because they placed their trust in the wrong glittering contracts. Buster Keaton. A million-dollar mistake that brought down a comedy empire. Buster Keaton, known as the Great Stone Face of the silent film era, was once a completely independent powerhouse with the ability to write, act, and produce his own films. The 1920s marked his golden age when he owned his own studio, created masterpieces like The General, and accumulated a massive fortune that anyone would envy. However, fate changed in 1928 when he signed a contract with the giant Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer through arrangements made by his family, despite warnings from Charlie Chaplin. This was a decision he would later bitterly call the biggest mistake of my life, a contract that stripped him of all his power. As soon as he entered the industrial studio system, Keaton was completely deprived of creative control and reduced to nothing more than a hired actor. His groundbreaking films were replaced by formulaic, rigid scripts, causing his artistic spirit to gradually become numb and depressed. The pressure of losing his creative child, combined with his failed marriage to Natalie Talmadge, pushed him into the abyss of alcohol dependency. This divorce not only took away custody of his children, but also wiped out most of the fortune he had built during his brilliant years. His mental and physical health deteriorated to the point that he often appeared on set intoxicated, causing studios to lose thousands of dollars per day. A shocking incident occurred when Louis B. Mayer personally stormed his dressing room to assert the studio's absolute authority. Just weeks later, in early 1933, MGM coldly fired him, ending the peak of a genius's career in less than 5 years after he joined. From a millionaire with his own empire, Keaton became penniless, forced into psychological treatment, and living in deep depression for a long period. He had to take on minor jobs writing comedic ideas for other stars for meager pay just to survive day by day. Hollywood had broken his creative wings, used him as a tool, and discarded him when its system no longer aligned with the freedom of a true artist. Keaton became living proof that the studio system could take everything: fame, power, and even family through rigid administrative rules. His downfall serves as a warning to anyone willing to trade freedom for the illusion of protection from powerful corporations. But sometimes cruelty does not stop at money. It also lies in how dark secrets behind stars are concealed. Errol Flynn, the Robin Hood stripped of glory and a mountain of debt. If 1930s cinema needed a face to represent charm and masculinity, Errol Flynn was the only choice. From a young man from distant Australia, he entered Warner Brothers and quickly became a golden goose through classics like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. Studio executives not only paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, but also deliberately crafted his image as a flamboyant ladies' man. They tolerated, even encouraged, his party lifestyle and scandalous relationships, believing that his rebellious image attracted female audiences to theaters. However, being nurtured by the system's excessive indulgence caused Flynn to lose control. Pouring money into luxuries such as the yacht Sirocco and expensive real estate in Bel Air. The real tragedy emerged in 1942, when two young women, Betty Hansen and Peggy Satterley, made shocking accusations about his misconduct. The trial in early 1943 turned Flynn's life into a national theater, torn apart by the press and subtly manipulated by the studio's PR machine. Studios launched extremely costly campaigns to protect his image, even forming support organizations to preserve the commercial value of their profitable star. Although he was ultimately acquitted, public trust in the silver screen, Hero was completely shattered, and the studio's attitude began to shift. Once they saw his appeal decline, Warner Brothers and its partners quietly cut major projects, pushing him into low-budget films with significantly reduced pay. The system's abandonment, combined with his deteriorating health due to alcohol dependency, pushed his finances into crisis. Mounting tax debts and enormous legal expenses wiped out what remained of his once million-dollar fortune. In his final years, the man who once had the world at his feet lived in poverty, even selling his most valuable personal belongings to cover living expenses. When he died in Canada in 1959 at the age of 50, Flynn left behind almost nothing, financially ending the life of a legend raised and then abandoned by Hollywood itself. The downfall of a hero sometimes begins with the very people who once praised them to the skies. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. The first millionaire and the price of being a sacrificial lamb. Roscoe Arbuckle was once a symbol of joy and the most beloved comedian in the world, known for his distinctive physique and remarkable agility. In 1921, he made history by signing a $3 million contract over 3 years, with Paramount Pictures becoming the first star to reach an annual income of $1 million. Yet that million-dollar empire collapsed in just a few days, beginning with a fateful party at the St. Francis Hotel in September 1921. After the sudden death of young actress Virginia Rapp Arbuckle was dragged into a shocking case filled with baseless yet sensational accusations that captivated the press. The media empire of William Randolph Hearst seized the opportunity to turn him into a symbol of Hollywood's moral decay to attract readers. Maliciously fabricated stories spread rapidly, distorting the image of a gentle comedian into that of a cruel man in the public's eyes almost instantly. Through 3 intense trials from late 1921 to mid-1922, Arbuckle faced enormous pressure and legal costs exceeding $700,000. To fund his defense and protect his reputation, he was forced to sell his house, cars, and most valuable possessions, leaving him completely financially ruined. In the final trial, the jury took only 6 minutes to declare him not guilty and issued a formal apology for the injustice he had endured. However, legal justice could not overcome the cruelty of the film industry, which chose to sacrifice him to calm public outrage against Hollywood. Immediately after his acquittal, a lifetime ban was imposed by censorship authorities, leading to all his films being pulled from theaters nationwide. Paramount promptly canceled his $1 million contract, severing all ties with the man they once considered a treasure, turning him into an outcast with nowhere to turn. From a powerful millionaire, Arbuckle was forced to change his name and take on low-level behind-the-scenes work under a pseudonym just to earn small amounts of money to survive. Hollywood chose to destroy his career to prove its purity, ignoring the fact that he had been fully exonerated by the law. Arbuckle's story remains one of the most painful examples of how an individual can be crushed by a system to protect collective interests. He died in obscurity, leaving behind a costly lesson about the fragility of fame and the danger of trusting million-dollar promises. The shadows of Hollywood still hold corners that even stage lights cannot illuminate. Veronica Lake, the broken angel and the cruelty behind the peekaboo hairstyle. If there was ever a face that defined the mysterious allure of 1940s film noir, it would undoubtedly be Constance Frances Marie Ockelman, known by her stage name Veronica Lake. With her iconic one-eye-covered hairstyle, she quickly became a strategic asset for Paramount, bringing in enormous salaries through a string of box office hits. Yet behind that glamorous exterior was a harsh process of industrializing a human being, as the studio forced her into rigid, predefined molds. They were only interested in exploiting Lake's appearance while neglecting the development of her actual talent, leaving her feeling like a commodity trapped within her own fame. In 1943, a horrific accident occurred on set when she tripped over a cable, leading to the death of her newborn son just a few days later. This tragedy, combined with a failed marriage, pushed her into a severe psychological crisis, and she began turning to alcohol as an escape from the pain. Instead of receiving sympathy, the Hollywood system activated its media machine to label her as difficult to work with. Rumors of conflicts with colleagues were widely circulated, a calculated strategy by the studio to isolate her and prepare for the eventual removal of a star who was losing control. By the late 1940s, when her films no longer met revenue expectations, Paramount coldly refused to renew her contract, cutting off her primary source of income. Her financial freefall happened so rapidly that by 1951, the IRS had seized her home to settle debts, pushing her and her husband into complete bankruptcy. The system's cruelty went so far that a once top-tier actress suddenly vanished from the cinematic map. In the 1960s, the public was shocked when a reporter discovered her living in cheap hotels and working as a waitress at a bar under an assumed name. Despite attempts to conceal her dire situation, the reality was that Veronica Lake had lost everything: money, career, and even her connection with her children. She passed away in 1973 at the age of 50 due to severe health complications after years of abandonment by the entertainment industry. Hollywood created a dazzling fashion icon, only to let that icon fade away in dark, impoverished bars. Bela Lugosi, the classic vampire and the contract that drained the artist. Bela Ferenc Desoblasco, better known as Bela Lugosi, created one of the most immortal characters in film history with his portrayal of Dracula in 1931. Yet the dazzling glory of that role became a curse that confined him within a narrow cage for the rest of his life. The Hollywood system at the time typecast him into repetitive horror roles, refusing to offer him any diverse opportunities simply because of his distinctive Hungarian accent. Studios systematically undervalued him, paying meager salaries even as his image generated enormous profits for them. While his contemporaries advanced, Lugosi was pushed into B-movies with steadily declining pay just to maintain a presence. Worse still, injuries from wartime left him suffering from chronic sciatica, forcing him to rely on prescribed pain medication. His dependence on morphine-based painkillers led to a severe decline in his health, and instead of offering support, producers began avoiding him due to concerns about instability. By the late 1940s, the career of the legendary Dracula had nearly collapsed, with only low-budget, poor-quality projects coming his way. Lugosi's financial situation became so dire that in 1955, he had to rely on a $1,000 donation from singer Frank Sinatra to cover rehabilitation expenses. He was one of the first stars brave enough to publicly acknowledge his health struggles, but that honesty did nothing to restore his standing in an unforgiving Hollywood. In his final days, the man who once embodied a magnificent on-screen terror had less than $2,000 left in his bank account. He lived in such poverty that he could barely afford basic necessities, a deeply ironic ending for a global icon. Bela Lugosi passed away in 1956 from a heart attack and was buried in his iconic Dracula costume. The role that brought him ultimate fame was also the one that drained his vitality, wealth, and artistic future until his final breath. When the curtain fell, all that remained were debts and a costume faded by time. The final actress on this list will show you just how ruthless a silent contract can be. Alma Rubens, The Contract of White Death and the Cruelty Behind Silent Films. Early Hollywood history has few tragedies as haunting and raw as the life of Alma Genevieve Riom. Born into a middle-class family in San Francisco, she entered the film industry in the 1910s under the name Alma Rubens and quickly caught the attention of executives at Triangle Film, thanks to her melancholic, deeply expressive beauty. During her golden period from 1916 to the early 1920s, Rubens was a cash cow, earning thousands of dollars per week, enough to live like royalty. After the massive success of humoresque 1920, she officially rose to superstardom, but with it came slave-like contracts that forced her to work continuously under suffocating studio control. Things took a dark turn after a serious car accident in California in the early 1920s, leaving her in constant physical pain. Instead of allowing their star to rest and recover, studios chose to intervene with powerful painkillers so she could continue performing non-stop in front of the camera. The Hollywood system at the time valued production schedules over actors' health, leading them to secretly supply morphine to keep Rubens artificially functional on set. This systemic enabling quickly drove her into severe chemical dependency, turning her into a victim of a brutally exploitative labor system. From 1921 to 1925, Rubens's career spiraled downward as she lost control of her behavior and became unable to complete scenes due to deteriorating health. The same studios that had once profited immensely from her immediately launched a campaign of isolation, blacklisting her and cutting off all major income sources without offering any medical support. Under pressure from the studios, the media of the time fabricated an image of her as a morally fallen star, due to personal lifestyle choices concealing the truth that she had been forced to work while ill. From a millionaire with enviable wealth, Rubens quickly became destitute due to overwhelming medical costs and financial exploitation by those around her at her most vulnerable. In 1927, she made one final attempt to save her life by voluntarily entering a rehabilitation facility in New York and trying to return to acting. However, as the era of sound films emerged, Hollywood permanently shut its doors on silent film stars, burdened with psychological scars, treating them as outdated commodities. On January 21, 1931, the woman who had once symbolized elegance and emotion breathed her last in New York City at just 33 years old. She died alone in extreme poverty without a single dollar to her name, leaving behind a heartbreaking testament to how fame can consume a life.